They packed the chapel with lilies like they could sweeten the stink of blame. I'm Grace Ellison, hospice nurse, 32, good at the quiet work no one sees, and terrible at stepping back when I should. I was already running on coffee and shame. My shifts bled into each other. My empathy had crawled out of my job description and made a nest in my chest. I was stubborn, loyal, and today, in this city chapel dripping with late afternoon rain, I felt humiliated, defensive, and so guilty I could taste metal. Stained glass washed the aisles in bruised colors. Polished shoes squeaked. Someone's phone buzzed and died under a cough. The hush had the shape of a stage. All eyes aimed toward the front, where Maureen Carter's picture smiled at a room that hadn't bothered to show up at 3 a.m. When the fevers came, Thomas walked in like he was leading a press conference. Well-cut suit, TV anchor hair, the smile he wore for donors and cameras. He hugged people with both hands, and his eyes slid over me like I was gum under the pew. Then he turned on a microphone and said, "We trusted the professionals, and somehow that meant me. You didn't do enough." It hit like a slap. Heads turned. A woman with a hat like a satellite dish stared at my hands, as if she'd find blood under my nails. I felt heat climb my neck. My mouth filled with all the nights I'd pressed cool cloths to Maureen's face while the house slept. The alarms I'd silenced with a thumb and a prayer. The time I changed her patch at 2 a.m. because the pain broke through and she whispered, "Thank you," like it was a secret. The stairs I climbed while Thomas texted from an airport lounge. I kept my eyes on the lilies until his eulogy cracked. Not loud. A hairline. He looked down at the paper, and his practiced voice dropped. "She called me," he said. "Late." She said, "If you can't make it, don't worry. Grace is here. She's the only one who listens." His mouth faltered like the word only tasted wrong. The room tilted. A few faces softened, others hardened. Someone behind me hissed, or I made it up because my ears rang. An aunt I didn't know slid past and squeezed my arm. "Be careful," she murmured, eyes darting to the front. "Not everyone wants the truth." On my way back to the wall, the church usher stopped me like he was fixing a hymn book. A plain envelope moved from his sleeve to my palm. "From Mrs. Carter," he said under his breath. She was clear. The paper felt heavier than it should. There was something inside that wasn't paper. A hard little shape taped to the fold. My name was on the front in Maureen's shaky block letters. Grace. The G smudged. I tucked it into my coat like a stolen thing and glanced up at the slideshow running quiet over the organ. Maureen on her porch, holding a mug. The silver bracelet I'd taken off the night before because it left a red mark on her wrist was on her arm in the picture, but the charm was wrong. The clasp sat on the outside. In the chart, someone had noted no opiate patch at time of death, but I had pressed a new one onto her shoulder at 2:14 a.m. Counted out loud, like we're trained. My stomach dipped. After, the rain had thinned to a mean drizzle. I stepped into it, envelope warm against my ribs, and my phone buzzed from an unknown number. One new message: "Don't let them tidy me away." Her words, last night. Her breath like a soft engine under the blankets. I slid my thumb under the flap. My fingers found tape. A key, small and cold, kissed my skin. I started to call the number back, heart up in my throat, when someone behind me said my name, not gentle, not friendly, and a camera flash blew white across the sidewalk. I flinched, half-opened envelope in one hand, phone shaking in the other, rain needling my cheeks, and all I knew was this: whatever I hadn't done, whatever I might have missed, was about to follow me home. I'm Grace Ellison, 32, hospice nurse. I often joke that I've seen more sunsets than most people my age, though the truth is, they don't always feel like triumphs. Nights are long and cold at the hospital, especially in the elderly ward, where the fluorescent lights hum like a swarm of bees. The smell of antiseptic lingers in the air, stubborn and white, mixing with the faint aroma of cabbage from the cafeteria down the hall. I've learned to become immune to. It's easy to get lost in the rhythm of it all, but those beats can sometimes drown out the humanity that exists beneath every diagnosis. I sacrificed a lot to wear this title as a badge of honor. Family dinners are often just pictures sent through a screen. While my friends discuss children and parenting struggles, I just nod, careful to keep my private pain locked away. My sister's kids think of me as the aunt who disappears. I can't blame them. The night I missed my niece's birthday, the guilt gnawed at me like a hungry animal. I spent that evening sitting beside Mrs. Hart in room 204, holding her hand as she slipped away, listening to the strained breathing that eventually turned silent. No longer an ailing body, just a whisper of who she used to be. Most nights I wanted to call my family, but what would I say? Sorry, I can't talk. I'm somewhere in the limbo of people dying. Sometimes I think the hardest part is returning home, where the silence wraps around me, heavy and familiar, reminding me of the moments I lost. I should have been at the party, or even just called, but my phone was silent. The hospital buzzed with life while my heart pulled itself in two. I've become good at pushing emotions aside, hiding my own needs under a steady stream of care for others. Yet there it is, that gnawing emptiness waiting just behind that thin wall of resolve. Just last week, during a particularly back-breaking shift, I overheard a doctor mutter to a colleague about the increase in pressure from the administration. "Just make sure the numbers look good," he said, and I got the sense that patient care was second to some spreadsheet they were obsessed with. That small comment hung in the air like a dark cloud, a whisper of neglect I couldn't shake. It's not just buildings and charts we're treating. It's lives, and I see. It's a tightrope act I perform daily, balancing between my compassion for my patients and the demands of the job. And beneath it all, a humorless part of me knows that it's only a matter of time before the balance tips. As I settled into a particularly frantic evening shift, the atmosphere was thick with tension, the kind that makes you instinctively hold your breath. An old patient, Mr. Jensen, was acting erratic, yelling at the nurses that they weren't doing their jobs. I could feel the anxious energy in the ward. More than a few eyes darted to the newcomer, a young intern who looked like he was out of his depth. "We should keep an eye on him," I said quietly to a nursing assistant. "He might turn dangerous." Caring for these patients means seeing their lives, not just their illnesses, and I prayed I wouldn't miss something vital. Maybe something bad was about to happen, and I'd feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. But all I could do was breathe in that cold, sterile air. The overhead lights flickered as I stepped into the crowded break room, the sound of hurried voices echoing off the sterile walls. A knot tightened in my stomach as I clipped the pen to my scrub pant pocket. I was already running behind on my checklist for the evening shift. The scent of burnt coffee hung thick in the air, mixing with the stale smell of last week's pizza, and I braced myself for what lay ahead. Just another night at St. Matthew's Hospital, I told myself, but this one felt different. As I poured myself a cup of that questionable brew, the door swung open, and Dr. Harrington strode in, his crisp white coat billowing behind him like a flag. I felt the tension rise. His presence instantly shifted the atmosphere. He began to speak, and instantly the room fell silent. "We need to step it up in patient wing A. The higher-ups are breathing down our necks about numbers," he barked, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "I expect all of you to pull your weight, no exceptions." I knew what that meant. More pressure on us, the nurses, like we weren't already juggling 100 things at once. I shifted my weight. I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was eyeing me in particular. If you've ever been unjustly accused, you know exactly how I felt. "Ready, Grace?" He shot at me abruptly, his voice sharp as a scalpel. It felt like a spotlight had landed squarely on me, bright and blinding. But that wasn't the worst of it. Just as I was about to respond, the room door burst open again, and there was Mrs. Johnson's family. 3 of them, all wide-eyed and frantic. "Where's my mother? She's supposed to be receiving her medication," the eldest daughter shouted, her voice ringing like an alarm in the tense air. I raised my hands in a calming gesture, but the daughter Susan was having none of it. She pushed past me, her indignation palpable. "This is unacceptable. You people are always so slow. My mother deserves better than this." As they bombarded the room with accusations, humiliation flooded through me. I was fighting to keep my composure, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks while everyone stared, witnesses to my so-called incompetence. Luckily, I caught a glimpse of Mr. Daniels, Mrs. Johnson's room neighbor, watching from a distance, his brows furrowed in concern. Maybe you understand the pain of seeing someone fragile being ignored. Just moments before they'd stormed in, I had been with Mrs. Johnson, who had been sleeping, her frail body resting comfortably. But the way Susan glared at me made it a challenge to defend my care for her mother. "Let me check on her," I said, raising my voice slightly above the chaos, hoping someone would listen. There was a flicker of disbelief in Susan's eyes, but she stepped back enough to let me rush past them. I parked myself outside Mrs. Johnson's room. The momentary calm a stark contrast to the storm inside, but I knew I'd have to confront it soon. I entered the room, and there was my patient, nestled beneath the pale sheets, hardly a hint of the commotion from outside. As I adjusted her pillow and checked the IV line, a familiar twinge of guilt washed over me. I had only just connected with Mrs. Johnson, but it was as if the universe kept tossing hurdles in my way. That ominous feeling deepened as the intercom crackled just then. "Nurse, report to room 305 immediately." The urgency in the voice sent a wave of dread through me. Who needed me? What had happened while I was merely trying to manage the storm raging outside? I noted my concerns in the medical records, yet felt the piercing stares of the family still in the hallway. Back in the break room, Dr. Harrington exchanged glances with a young intern who seemed ready to crumble under the pressure. "That's it," he exclaimed, pointing at me. "Grace, keep an eye on that bed in 304. I heard someone's going into distress." I nodded, but I could feel the weight of their judgment, the way they underestimated my ability and my care. The sense of being disregarded swirled around me like a thick fog, and I took a deep breath to ground myself. Then something clicked. Some part of my mind said, little did I know that this attitude would put me against the entire hospital. But I shook it off. I would fight for my patients because nobody else would. I turned my attention back to the family, forcing calmness into my voice. "The medications are administered through the schedule. Please allow me a moment to check on your mother's current status." It was confident, crisp, but also firm enough to convey a warning. My eyes locked with Susan's, and I held her gaze. Challenges like these were what I faced daily, yet they never made it easier. As I dashed toward room 304, I felt a surge of anger rise within me. I knew I had poured every bit of myself into caring for my patients, despite constant accusations of negligence. In this hospital system, it often felt like we were ghosts rather than caregivers, losing sight of the humanity we were meant to serve. I recorded each incident with detail, each indignity countering that helpless feeling, and it was in that silence that everything began to collapse. Behind every name, every number was a life I had to protect, and I wouldn't back down, even when the tides were against me. The door to 304 swung open, revealing a scene of chaos I hadn't anticipated. The heart monitor beeped wildly, the sound slicing through the air like a siren. My pulse quickened. It was fear, the kind of fear that burrows deep in your belly, and in that instant, destiny was already decided, and I still didn't know. I wish I could say I had time to brace myself before stepping into room 304, where the chaos loomed like a beast waiting to pounce. The heart monitor's frantic beeping echoed in my ears, a relentless reminder that I wasn't merely fighting hospital politics, but also life and death. I shoved the door open, palm pressed to the cool metal, and rushed inside, my heart racing as if I were chasing an escape. A nurse stood nearby, her face pale as she shouted for help. "We need the crash cart!" I recognized her as Karen from the day shift, her voice straining almost to breaking. That plea sent a shiver down my spine. We were already drowning in patients tonight, and here was this sudden escalation. But I tried to silence the dread clamoring in my head, focusing on the task at hand. "Mr. Thompson," I called, urgency spilling from my lips. "I'm here with you." He looked at me, not seeing the calmness I was trying to project, but rather a panicked reflection of his own. I bent over him, pressing my fingers lightly into his shoulder to steady him as he writhed. "Breathe with me, sir. In and out, in and out." A flurry of footsteps swept into the room, and in moments that felt like hours, the crash cart appeared. I fumbled with the defibrillator, heart racing, not just from the pressure of the moment, but from the mounting fear of the scrutiny I sensed just outside the door. But then the machine whirred to life, and for a fleeting moment, I thought everything might just work out. I could reset the rhythm of this man's heart. I could show them all. I was a nurse, and I could save him. A device beeped, a calming sound. We needed clarity, but clarity felt miles away. I glanced at Karen, who was watching me so intently that I could see the fear reflected in her eyes, and that tiny spark of doubt started to ignite in my own belly. I shouted my commands, adrenaline mixing with hope. We made our moves in a chaotically choreographed dance. "Clear," I called as I pushed the paddles onto his chest, feeling hope wash over me like sunlight breaking through clouds. But then, it felt as though time unraveled. Mr. Thompson's heart didn't respond. I pressed my hands against the paddles again, willing him to fight, but the silence that followed was deafening. The air suddenly transformed into a strained tightrope, each second a heartbeat echoing like a hammer pound. Only the stakes were far higher. I realized I was drawing attention, and I heard the door behind me open again, more voices flooding into the room. When I turned around, it felt like stepping into an ice-cold storm. Mrs. Thompson's family, previously quiet, now stood wide-eyed and horrified at the crucial moment of chaos unfolding before them. "What's happening to my husband?" Mrs. Thompson screamed, her voice slicing through the chaos. Instinctively, I raised my hands in a placating gesture, but it did little to quell the tidal wave of anxiety crashing against us. "Ma'am, please, we're doing everything we can." I tried to assert, but I could see her confusion turning to anger, the flames of panic igniting around us. The room felt like it constricted, every breath steeped with judgment. I sensed the judgment settling in the atmosphere, the silent stares from the family, the strange, paralyzing mix of vulnerability and powerlessness. Were they waiting for me to fail? And that's when it happened. I heard a snicker from the doorway, a voice almost mocking, dripping with derision. "Just another night with Nurse Grace, huh?" It was a fellow nurse, and I wished I could wipe the floor with my self-esteem in that moment, like the crumpled medical records I had been clutching, their edges ragged and stained with yesterday's coffee. I felt my cheeks warm, the relentless heat creeping up my neck. How could they think that? Did anyone see how hard I fought for each patient, how much I poured into this place? Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I heard the dreaded crackle of the intercom. "Nurse Ellison, come to the front desk immediately." A summons that felt less like a request and more like a public execution. My heart sank. Whatever was waiting for me out there felt too heavy a burden to bear, but I knew I couldn't run. Sauntering out of room 304 was no longer an option. I had to face this obliteration, feeling the weight of every accusation lodged against me. If I turned away now, their thoughts would gnaw at me like persistent rats, waiting to bury themselves in my shame. As I tread back into the unsettling light of the hallway, I caught sight of the glances thrown my way. Patients, peering out from cracked doors, the haunting shadows of their muted voices trailing behind them like an echo of grief. I stifled a shudder, the sound of my heart amplifying against the antiseptic walls as I. And those pairs of eyes, they branded me, each silently questioning my worth, my decisions, and my inevitable flaws. "There you are," said Dr. Harrington, voice stern, a glaring accusation behind the facade of professionalism. "What have you been doing in there? The higher-ups are breathing down our necks about the statistics. We can't afford another incident like this." My feet felt glued to the floor, words lodged in my throat like stones. How could he stand there, filled with righteous indignation, when I was here wrestling with life? I was drowning while they pointed fingers, waiting for me to collapse under the weight of their judgments. I wanted to scream, to shake them until they understood, not only my battle, but the unseen war raging within every caregiver in that building. But I swallowed it down, fixing the mask of resolve back onto my face. And just as I prepared to speak, to explain, everything fell out from beneath me. A soft voice murmured behind me, familiar yet foreign, an echo of a last breath shared in the gentle stillness of the night. "Don't let them tidy me away." It hung there in the air, sharper than glass, stubbornly refusing to let me forget my fight. Who had spoken those words? I turned my head, desperate to find the source. Reshaping my purpose in that relentless storm. And that's when I heard a voice that would change everything. I was standing there, heart pounding like a drum in a funeral procession, facing down Dr. Harrington at the front desk. I could feel the weight of my colleague's eyes boring into me, a chorus of judgment in the air heavier than the antiseptic stench of the hospital. The outrage of the family outside room 304 lingered like smoke, filling my lungs with doubt. The buzz of fluorescent lights overhead and the sterile white walls felt suffocating, a prison of expectations and failures that I'd pinned to my chest like a name tag. "Grace, we can't afford mistakes," Harrington spat, his eyes narrowing into slits. He had a way of speaking that made it seem like everyone else was just echoes, mere background noise to his authority. Another incident like what happened in there could cost us our licenses. If you can't handle the pressure, maybe it's time to consider a different career. The stunned silence of the break room bore down on me. My coworkers were quiet, eyes darting between me and Harrington. Like I was a soap opera they were watching unfold in real time. I wanted to scream, to tell them that My mind raced back to Mr. Thompson, his frail body losing the battle as I wheeled my heart into the storm. But all that came out was a tight-lipped silence. As if sensing my faltering spirit, Dr. Harrington grinned, low and mocking. "What's it going to be, Grace? Are you in or out?" I felt my stomach drop. How could anyone who wore the title of doctor twist that knife deeper? And yet here I was, the high-stakes game playing out in front of an audience that preferred to keep their heads down and their opinions to themselves. A coworker pulled away from the back of the room, eyes focused somewhere beyond me, as if the carpet had mesmerized them into submission. In a sudden swell of anger, I braced myself, taking a half step forward, even though it felt like stepping into the equivalent of a lion's den. "I'm not out," I shot back, my voice trembling like the last leaf clinging to a branch in autumn. "I'm right here, trying to save lives." "But how many lives, Grace?" he challenged, each word sliced through the increments of my resolve, which were gradually unraveling in real time. "How many have you saved in the time you've been wasting your breath in this supposed profession? Cut the sentimentality. Sometimes it's cold facts that matter." I resisted the urge to shove my hands into my pockets. Instead, I clenched my fists so tight I could feel my nails bite into my palms, desperate to find strength, while a chorus of scoffs echoed in the background. I wanted to scream that those facts were people, stories, hopes, a glimmer of something beautiful wrapped in frailty. Hands that had spent years holding my patients in their last moments weren't just numbers and percentages filtered through a ledger book. "Let me tell you something about freezing numbers," I pushed back, the words spilling like water gushing from a broken dam. "Numbers don't feel pain, don't need a compassionate touch. They don't comfort someone as they slip away, and they sure as hell don't translate into a life saved." Dr. Harrington's composure slipped for a heartbeat, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face, a crack in the armor of his presumed invincibility. The distracted murmurs of my colleagues grew in strength, as if my words were a banner unfurling in heavy winds. Then Susan, Mrs. Johnson's daughter, materialized at the edge of the thrumming swirl of faces. Her arms crossed, a fierce glare trained on me like a laser guiding an attack. "What's this? More excuses?" she spat, venom dripping from her voice. "Is that all you can offer us, Grace? Is this how you treat our family?" I hadn't realized how many eyes were on us until I felt the heat of their judgment, scalding like boiling water. I could practically feel them leaning closer, breath held as I stumbled deeper into this confrontation. "You don't understand," I began. But before I could grasp at the tether of compassion, the door swung open behind her, revealing a cadre of hospital administrators blended into one shade of disappointment. They echoed Sue's accusations before she even spoke, both intimidating and accusatory. "The higher-ups want to report on this, Grace. You could be suspended for this level of negligence." A chair scraped back as someone shifted in the crowd, and I thought it might be my own recovery or shaking limbs unanchoring me. The murmurs pressed like waves pulling sand beneath my feet, my voice now competing against the flood of whispering discontent. I realized, standing there in that heavy spotlight of expectation, that I was marked, painted into a corner of public scrutiny. With every barrage I took, I felt another layer of my dignity stripped away until I almost surrendered. The collective tension was palpable, and it tightened around my throat like a noose. But as I looked around at the faces, some sympathetic, some judgmental, I felt a fire flicker dimly inside of me. I wasn't going to let them take that away just yet. I could almost hear the heartbeat with the rhythm of the tension building in the air. But it was mine. Dr. Harrington raised a hand like a judge delivering a final verdict, and I knew I wasn't done fighting. "You need to realize your limitations, Grace. It's about accountability, and clearly you're lacking." I drew a deep breath, steadied myself, and before I could stop myself, I swung an arm toward him, fingers extended like a knife. "It's easy to throw accusations when you're standing on the sidelines. You've handed out reprimands like candy while we're the ones wrestling demons. My patients deserve better than to be statistics in your little game, and I'll fight for them until my last breath." That was it. I could feel my heart pounding out a furious tattoo against my ribs, ready to spring into action. I was on the precipice of a fracture. Could I hold this ground? Or would all my efforts to save those I cared for result in my own undoing? Outside that sanctuary of confrontation, a distant whisper echoed, nudging the very boundaries of resilience I'd tried so hard to build. "Don't let them tidy me away." The air in the room spun heavier as I held their gaze, pleading for someone to see me, to strip down those judgments and stand with me. But just as despair threatened to sweep through me, I didn't know that someone unexpected was about to stand up for me. I could still feel the pulse of tension in the air, a live wire crackling between us, as I stood there, trembling with the weight of everyone's gaze. Dr. Harrington's mouth twisted in that cynical smile, and Susan stared daggers, her resentment palpable. I took a breath, preparing for the next round in this surreal boxing match that had overtaken my life. But then, from the back of the group, someone stepped forward. A figure. "Grace," said Mr. Daniels, Mrs. Johnson's room neighbor. He had always been quiet, a frail old man who tended to fade into the wallpaper, but now his voice cut through the noise. "I think you should know something." For a moment, the room fell into a brief silence, as if his words were centrifugal force, pulling all our spinning thoughts to one focal point. "What now?" Dr. Harrington snapped, crossing his arms. But Mr. Daniels kept his gaze fixed on me, his expression grave, and that made him suddenly more relevant than anyone else in the room. "I overheard the conversations," he continued, reluctance lacing his voice. "The whispers about Mrs. Johnson and others. The tension thickened, each word like a hammer strike against glass. You're not the only one keeping secrets here, you know." His cryptic phrase hung in the air, a taut thread about to snap. "What do you mean?" I pushed, nerves tightening in my stomach, and his eyes flickered with hesitance before he spoke again. "They've been calling it malpractice more than once, Grace," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think Mrs. Johnson was admitted for what they tell you. I don't think she was the only one." Confusion wrestled with alarm. My heart raced, faster than a runaway train. "What are you trying to say?" I demanded, desperate for clarity. But before he could reply, a small commotion erupted outside the break room. A nurse burst in with a stack of papers. Hospital charts, I realized, overfilling her clipboard. She dropped them on the counter, not in a rush, but with a purpose that made my gut twist. It happened to be just in front of Mr. Daniels, who leaned forward, a look of serious intention igniting in his eyes. "Oh," he muttered, voice trembling. "That shouldn't be there." "What?" I whipped my head to the side, craning my neck to catch a glimpse of what he was talking about. But before I could pull the relevant papers from the small mountain, he had already turned his gaze toward me, and the urgency now carved into his voice made my pulse quicken again. "The charts, Grace. The errors tucked within." "Errors?" I echoed, the unease tangling deeper in my gut. Suddenly, the air shifted, and it felt as if time suspended itself, pressing down so hard I could feel it in my bones. Everyone turned to watch, and I could sense the collective breath held in this fragile moment. Mr. Daniels's fingers shook slightly as he reached toward the paper stack, and I felt an electric current of anticipation fill the room. The nurse, oblivious to the tension building, moved to shuffle the charts, and then snapped her fingers. She pointed to one particular document, swiping it with the edge of her finger. "Here," she remarked. "This dose was noted wrong for Mr. Thompson. Someone missed it altogether." Mr. Daniels's breath caught. "No, that's the medication protocol for someone else entirely," he blurted, eyes wide with a sudden realization that played like a melody against the anxious atmosphere, his words catching fire. I stepped closer, curiosity mingling with dread. Who else? Now it felt as though the room was in collision, the pieces shifting like a jigsaw puzzle, finally coming to an endgame. "I knew it. I had the chart. There's a mix-up somewhere," he gasped, and the air felt electric with every word. "If it isn't just negligence, it could be something much worse. You have to search for the files. There could be something significant, something we're not seeing." My fingers brushed the edge of the torn paper, a billow of panic rattling me. I didn't know if it was adrenaline or the rising tide of fear, but everything threatened to cascade down like cards in a house of whispers. "What do you mean?" I pressed, my voice a feral whisper. My mind was racing, trying to anchor itself amidst the spiraling chaos. Mr. Daniels leaned in. My head spun. Could it be true? Was it possible that something far more insidious lay within the confines of St. Matthew's? My heart raced at the cliff of possibilities. But just as the answers began to coalesce into something tangible, Another wave of voices crashed against my consciousness from the hallway. Dr. Harrington stepped forward, cutting off our conversation. "Enough of this," he snapped. "We have protocols to follow." And then, just like that, the moment shattered into discordant sound. I teetered on the edge of understanding, yet the urgency faded with a swift nudge from behind me, an unseen force shifting the gravity of the room. I felt my own understanding clashing against the chilling certainty that there was more to unravel. "Grace, listen to them," Daniels demanded softly, but the words were drowned out by the laughter of distant voices and the perception of unwanted meddling. The walls seemed to close in as the reality of my world blurred, the pressure ravaging my thoughts. Everyone around me chattered, drifting further from the depth of what I thought I'd just begun to grasp. And then, a final eruption of broken sound from the hallway tickled the back of my senses. A thin breath spilled from my lips. "Someone knows." I looked back at Mr. Daniels, his gaze one of urgent fear interlaced with hope. In that moment, I realized someone knew the truth and had just let it slip. I stood in that break room, the tension clinging to the air like humidity, stifling. My heart was thundering as Mr. Daniels hinted at something deeper than mere negligence. I couldn't shake the palpable fear etching itself into the hearts of those around me. Then, Dr. Harrington, still puffed up with his authority, intervened, attempting to seize control of a situation that felt like it was racing beyond anyone's grasp. "Enough of this nonsense. We have patients to attend to," he barked, dismissing the truth that was begging to surface. I could see the incredulity etched on Susan's face, her expression still twisted with resentment for me, unaware of the greater horrors unfolding within the hospital walls. But I couldn't turn back. The sparks igniting in the room begged for truth, and I was poised at the edge of that precipice. "No, Dr. Harrington," I said, my voice steady, though my heart quaked beneath the surface. "We need to hear this. This hospital is built on the lives we save, not the numbers we tally." "What are you trying to imply, Grace?" His voice boomed, but I didn't flinch. I understood that in moments of catastrophe, clarity sometimes disguised truths more sinister than our instincts wanted to acknowledge. "I think it's time we face the consequences of our actions," I pressed, locking eyes with Mr. Daniels, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "People are suffering here, and we can't ignore it. We can't just push it aside, hoping it disappears." I could feel the eyes of my colleagues narrowing, their skepticism palpable, yet I pressed onward. "Your charts? The errors. They have names, faces, lives hanging in the balance." An electric energy rippled through the air, pulling every gaze toward the crumpled pile of papers still resting on the break room counter. "We're talking about negligence wrapped in the guise of professionalism." Dr. Harrington opened his mouth to retort, his indignation palpable. But before he could unleash another tidal wave of his condescension, Mr. Daniels blurted it out, shaking and vulnerable. "It's true. Look at the charts, for God's sake." He fumbled forward, gripping the edge of the table for balance. "If you look closely, you'll see that the dosage for Mr. Thompson was mixed up with Mrs. Johnson's medication. This has been happening." There was a silence that smothered the room. My eyes flickered between Harrington and Mr. Daniels, waiting for that eruption, a chain reaction bound to explode. "What?" Mrs. Thompson's eldest daughter screamed, her earlier hostility replaced by alarm. "Are you saying my mother was a mistake? That she could have been treated better if you hadn't dropped the ball?" The crowd was stirring, voices rising in disbelief and horror. This can't be true," someone interjected from the back, disbelief swimming in their eyes. The whispers coiling around us became a cacophony, the air thick with judgment, outrage, and a desperate need for clarity. In the midst of those revelations, I caught a glimpse of Dr. Harrington. His face paled, the bravado faltering, The mask he wore as a leader started to crack, revealing a flicker of fear beneath. But instead of owning the moment, he surged forward, desperation rooting him to the ground. "This is absurd. You'll ruin your careers, all of you." He gestured wildly, his voice raising to a shriek. "Don't you understand? I can get you suspended. You're letting your emotions cloud judgment." I felt my heart sink for a moment. For the briefest heartbeat, I almost felt pity for him. This man clinging to his power like a drowning man could grasp at straws. But then I remembered the faces of all those I cared for, the lives we were trying to piece back together, even as bureaucracies tried to sweep them under the rug. "No, we're not letting this go," I countered, feeling a surge of strength. "We are fighting for them, for justice. The truth matters more than your reputation, Dr. Harrington." Suddenly, a nurse spoke, a quiet voice that somehow cut through the noise. "I'll back you up, Grace. We won't stay silent." At first, I couldn't believe what I heard, but another nurse joined in, then another. "We're not covering for you any longer." Their courage sparked a fire within the room, emboldening us all. Susan's family, moments before simmering with anger, began exchanging glances, eyes widening with empathy as they absorbed the implications. The collective shame bounced back at us like an echo, each second stretching long, volatile. "Take a look at Mrs. Johnson's chart," someone yelled, and like a dam breaking, the flood of paperwork began circulating around the room. The visuals of names, overdosages, and flag discrepancies came alive. A pen fell, rolling away across the tiled floor, a broken sound among the gasps of realization. But there I stood, vulnerable and raw. I could still taste the rage on my tongue, yet I fought back the urge to break down into tears. This was more than just a workplace scandal. It was a heartache. It was lives slipping through our fingers while we stood by, pretending everything was all right. Harrington's bravado dwindled, replaced by a desperate reality. "You're making a mistake. You don't know what you're doing," he pleaded, shifting his weight as if he wanted to shrink away. But the truth held its ground, unyielding, like a towering cliff against fierce waves. "No, you're the one who doesn't know," I said, my resolve rippling through me like electricity. "You don't understand our responsibility. You're hiding behind your power, hoping we'll all forget." And in that exact moment, I made an irrevocable decision. "I'm not part of this anymore," I declared, voice forging ahead like a blade cutting through the storm. "I won't carry this shame. You'd rather save your face than save lives. I'm reporting this, right now." Dr. Harrington's face turned ashen, and I could see the defeat wash over him like a river rushing through a canyon. The atmosphere shifted dramatically, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of his lies. As I stepped away from the table, breathing out the tension, I glanced at Mr. Daniels. He looked at me with a mix of gratitude and pride, two emotions bridging the gap between vulnerability and strength. The room grew heavy with realization. A flood of voices, faces filled with shock, anger, disbelief. My colleagues shifting their allegiances in near-perfect harmony, like a tidal wave realigning the sands on a shore. And then came my closing line, perched precariously on my tongue, like the truth finally freed from its chains. "I won't let you tidy me away. We fight for every life, or none at all." In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I had chosen the path of truth, and ultimately, justice. I stood on the edge of a new beginning, a breath of fresh air filling my lungs, as I looked out over the city from my small apartment balcony. It had been 6 months since I bravely reported the errors, and the whirlwind that followed had eclipsed every sense of normalcy I once knew. The story had become bigger than me, catalyzing changes across the hospital that I once thought were impossible. I had found myself at the heart of it, a reluctant whistleblower turned advocate. What surprised me even more than the outpouring of support from colleagues was the ripple effect it had sent through the caregiver community. Soon after my confrontation, word spread beyond the confines of our hospital, sparking conversations and reforms in facilities around the city. Compassionate care now occupied the discussions of board meetings, driving a culture shift that began aiming for quality over quantity. I could hardly believe it. In the midst of my battle, I'd unearthed a voice that resonated now. The stakes ran high, but with each small success, I slowly began to weave a new purpose into my life. My role had morphed. I had turned from a nurse who often felt invisible into a force that illuminated the importance of humanity in healthcare. As I collaborated with others who had experienced similar struggles, we formed a united front, pioneering initiatives that echoed with the fundamental idea that each patient deserved dignity beyond their disease. While the irony of being at the center of a fight for compassionate care wasn't lost on me, it fueled a fire to ensure no one else had to face the impersonal world of numbers I had once navigated. One day, while I sat down to finalize the presentation for a local conference, my heart swelled with appreciation for how far I had come. Flashes of the chaos and tears cascaded like distant memories, reminders of the storm from which I had emerged stronger, steadier, and more resolute than ever. The past 6 months had been a metamorph. I would carry those lessons with me, not just as whispers or regrets. Those would forge the heartbeat of my future, a steady rhythm guiding me toward making a difference in a world that so desperately needed it. I'd finally found my footing, and I was ready to walk the path ahead, steadfast in my commitment to protecting the lives that interlaced with mine. I stood in front of the crowd that had gathered for the healthcare reform conference, the energy buzzing in the air like I was about to step onto a stage for a performance. Weeks of preparation led to this moment, but I never expected to feel the weight of what my journey had become. It was a strange twist of fate to go from a quiet hospice nurse facing down a pathetic authority to this, the face of a movement, a champion of compassion and care. As I took the podium, looking out at the sea of faces eager for change, awareness flooded me. I saw nurses, doctors, and family members whose patience and understanding had turned into a... I was a voice, a heartbeat steadily rising above the noise. I'm here to remind you that healthcare is not just about numbers. It's about the people behind those numbers, I began, my voice steady, but laced with emotion. The applause came crashing down like a chorus of hope. I shared stories of patients who fought their battles with grace and dignity, of the heartwarming moments that far outweighed the medical charts that represented them as mere diagnoses. As I spoke, I could feel the room swell with understanding, with agitation, and a determination that sparked like kindling in droughted land. By the time I finished, my heart was pounding, not just for the energy I had generated, but for the shared promise that lingered in the air. I stepped down from the stage to a chorus of claps and cheers, the faces of my peers beaming with recognition and gratitude. Mr. Daniels came up to me, his proud smile reflecting in the glimmering eyes of those gathered around. "You've led us here," he said, and I felt tears threaten to rain down. "Your courage has ignited what this system needs." The next day felt surreal as I opened my email. The overwhelming response to my speech turned into a wave of invitations to speak at more places, to share our story. A ripple effect that represented the awakening of a system long complacent. The grace effect, as some had humorously dubbed it, was quickly turning into a movement. A network of like-minded individuals formed, united by the belief that compassion should reign once more in healthcare, reminding me so vividly of the fragility and strength of our humanity. Small changes began to emerge in the system. The hospital instituted new protocols, and compassion training became part of employee onboarding. Families now had a louder, clearer voice in their loved ones' care, and nurses knew they had advocates fighting alongside them. I finally felt that the struggles of my past were becoming shadows, not burr. As I leaned against my balcony railing one evening, reflecting on the whirlwind I had navigated, I understood that this was only the beginning. I knew our fight wouldn't end here, but I felt a deep sense of fulfillment, filling the empty spaces once occupied by doubt. I hoped that the light we were shining would illuminate the path for those who followed. So here's my call to you. A transformation doesn't just happen. It's ignited by those brave enough to speak out and overturn the status quo. Subscribe immediately to this channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories illuminating the ongoing fight for compassion. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm, showing the world we care. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about these changes that ripple through the system. And please, share this video with at least 5 friends who need to know that the fight doesn't have to be endured alone. Together, we can push for a future where compassion